living in the presence of God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 25, we read of a king, capitalized for the references to God, who welcomes certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, I was hungry, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. The elect asked him when it was that they had served him in these ways, and the king answered, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto the one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed He does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving Him. Paramahansa Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as the greatest man of humility I ever knew. He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. This is a quote from the autobiography. Another day found me walking alone near the Howrah railroad station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they used the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition, I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashaya. Sir, how came you here? The saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips? Ignorant and wise, he passed his arm around me affectionately. I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for Him everywhere. If you would hear His voice, listen for it in all sounds, and also in their supporting silences. If you would know God, seek His wisdom behind merely human knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter states, One who beholds my presence everywhere, and all things dwelling equally in me, never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him, through all eternity. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. The theme of this week is living in the presence of God. I found that that this is an easy subject, not because I'm particularly good at living in the presence of God, but because I had the blessing of knowing someone who lived in the presence of God always, Swami Kriyananda. He was a very special person. He seemed like a surfer. He could float on the waves of the divine ocean, and he could fall sometimes, and he sometimes would ask the same question to a person more than once, and one would ask, why? Maybe just the reason of living in the present moment and feeling what God wanted of him in that moment. Maybe he didn't realize that he had asked the same question. He felt that he needed to ask that question. Maybe because that person needed to really understand something. He was always open to the guidance of God. Probably he had an inner attunement that made him always be in joy. And if he had behaved in a different way, maybe he would have lost that joy. In fact, one time he was talking to a person that he knew without judgment, was talking about a certain person, and he said certain things about that person. And even though it wasn't judgmental, he said, no, wait. I have a feeling that Master is not happy with what I have been saying, so cancel it. Perhaps in that moment, the joy in his heart had diminished, because above all, living in the presence of God means living in joy. This is why the great saints can go through terrible tests and still remain in joy, because they have understood, they have found the key, the right key of living life. And we will all arrive at that sooner or later. It's just a question of time. Because, why? Why was he able to live, Swami Kriyananda? Why was he able to live in this way, in such a blessed way? Because he had already overcome the limits of his ego. He no longer had an ego, or rather, he had just that little bit of ego that he needed to do his work, to function in this world. The consciousness of ego is feeling yourself separate from everything, contractive. I, in my individuality, am separate from everything else, from God and from everything. It is a contraction, contractiveness, and this contractiveness manifests also in the body. Recently, I decided to deepen this question of the ego and to see what I could do to overcome it. Because I was realizing that it's a very great obstacle. Swami Kriyananda had overcome the ego in one evening in a meditation. He had already understood that it was a great weight and obstacle, and he said, "Get out! I want to be free forever from this weight, from this thing." And he was able to do it. When he left his meditation room, he saw Yogananda, who knew what had happened, and he patted him on the head and said, "Good, very good." So I tried it in meditation to say, "Get out." I tried to convince him in every way, saying, "Listen, it's also good for you. Then you will be happier, you'll be more relaxed." However, it hasn't yet worked. So I am now reading what Swami Kriyananda said about how to overcome the ego. And later I will read a few points. He wrote many points on this, but I will only read a few because I know that we need to finish in time for lunch. And also, I don't want everyone to feel discouraged from seeing how much apparent distance there is between ourselves and our goal. But to at least go forward, we just have to start with one step at a time. So before that, I'd like to tell you a couple of stories about the life of Swami Kriyananda to explain how he manifested his state of being always in attunement with God. These are beautiful stories. If you haven't read them, they're in the book by Asha Praver, Swami Kriyananda as We Have Known Him. These are stories from many different people who had the opportunity of living with Swami Kriyananda. She's saying she has to have mercy on Gitanjali, who's translating, and not go too fast. And also those whom he met, who didn't necessarily live closely with him. One tragic comedy story is about a very strong and heavy motorcyclist, a very large man with long hair, huge biceps, tattoos. His arms were so big, as much as the thigh, as big around as the thigh of a normal person, that he couldn't wear his astrological bangle on his arm, but he had to wear it as a necklace around his neck. Usually, Swami Kriyananda traveled around in his car, but in a certain period, he began to use a little motor scooter, and the description is that he was riding around very happy with his little Hawaiian shirts going up and down the roads at Ananda Village in California. One day, something happened. Maybe there was a hill, and he didn't have enough speed, and the motor scooter fell over, and the part of the motor touched his leg and burned it quite severely. And after this burn became infected. So Swami Kriyananda continued his activities, etc. And then one day, this big motorcycle rider who had a huge devotional heart, he came to Swamiji and kneeled before him, and he saw that Swamiji had this burn on his leg. And he said, "Swami, what happened?" And Swami said, "Well, nothing. A few days ago, I was riding my motor scooter, and it fell over and burned me." And the man said, "Oh, Swami, a terrible thing also happened to me. It's a miracle that I am alive. A car hit me on my motorcycle, and I rolled and rolled and rolled. I should have been killed in that moment, but I am alive." And then he said, "Swami, when did your accident happen?" And it was the same day and the same time, the same minute in which this other man had had his accident. And he began to cry, and he said, "Swami, you saved my life. You took on yourself my karma." There have been other moments in which Swamiji silently took the karma of others. It's not that he said, "This is a hallucination. Now I am, announcement, now I am taking the karma of somebody." It was something that only a few devotees who were in tune with him came to understand what had happened. In another moment, there was a woman who, for her whole life, had lived in a very deep sadness. Her whole life was sad. And she was never able to come out of this sadness. And there was a musical evening at the Ananda village. And she came to this social moment with Swami Kriyananda. And she began, and Swami put his hand on the shoulder of her husband, and without looking at her, put his hand on her heart, on her back, at the level of her heart. And she felt a very strong pressure from his hand, and a huge power that came out of it. Does someone have their cell phone turned on? Please turn your cell phones off. In that moment, she was free forever from that sadness that she had carried her whole life. Why did Swami Kriyananda buy a motor scooter at some moment? Did he know that there would be this accident, and that in that day, at that moment? I don't think so. I think that he had felt in himself Non è chiaro che cosa sta creando questo. We're not sure what's making that noise. I think that he felt guided. So now she's thinking it might be her cell phone. She's trying to figure out how to put it on the flight mode. Oops. This happened one time to Swamiji when his cell phone went off in the middle of a talk and he was asking everyone to turn off their phones and it turned out to be his. Getting back to the story, I think that Swami felt guided to do certain things without knowing why. Thinking, okay, Master is telling me to do this. He's telling me to get a motorcycle. Okay, I'll do it. If he wants it, there must be a reason. His entire life was like this. In many other ways. One time he was here in the dining room here in Assisi, and I remembered that I sort of pushed my way in order to sit next to him at the table. And he didn't even look at me once, as if I didn't exist. He didn't even look towards me. It was like I didn't exist. And I started to feel a little uncomfortable. That as soon as somebody came who was serving the lunch, I said, "You come and sit here next to Swami, and I will serve the lunch in your place." She sat down by Swami, and I went and served. And waited for the plates to carry to the tables. At that moment, Swami looked at me and smiled. What did he know? He wasn't present when I forced myself into sitting next to him. He maybe didn't even feel me. Maybe he didn't even hear me propose this exchange with the other woman. But he felt a disharmony in me previously, and then afterwards he probably felt more harmony in myself. I was thinking of myself in the fact that I was uncomfortable, but I also wanted to give that opportunity to someone else to sit next to him. When we don't have ego, God can use us. Look at nature. The animals, they have very little ego. If one could enter into their evolution, I'm sorry, I don't understand the point she's making. Just give me a moment. It's only human beings that have an ego. I want this, I want that. Talking about animals, I think I saw on television the story of a woman who had lost her son, and she was destroyed by this loss. And she had a big husky dog. And this dog every day made her get up out of bed to go for a walk. And this was already a great help for her. One day, she decided to kill herself. And she got up and she went into the bathroom, because in the bathroom were the tranquilizer pills that she could use to kill herself. And in that moment, the dog prevented her from going into the bathroom. He stood between her and the door and would not let her pass. And then, I don't remember if it was the same day or the day after, the dog forced her to leave the house. And he took her towards a sporting field where they did sports. And when she came close to this field, because she couldn't believe her eyes, she saw a boy there that seemed almost exactly like her son. And he was playing some game. And she made friends with this boy. And this helped her also to come out of this terrible period. Maybe this dog was an incarnated angel? I don't think so. I think that just because, simply for the reason that he didn't have an ego, he was able to be used by God in a way that was in tune with this woman's karma to help her come out of this, her personal nightmare. So it would be beautiful if we could all play in this way, to try at least a little bit during the day to put aside our ego and to permit God to express Himself through us. Seeing as how I told you that recently I've been trying to pay attention to the ego in myself, I observed that every time a thought comes from the soul, we feel expansion. However, whenever a thought or a feeling comes from ego, we feel contraction, contractedness. So this could be enough to observe in ourselves. Am I relaxed in this moment? No, I'm tense because I have to do Sunday service. This is the ego who is tense. If instead I think, I'll invite Master to do this through me, I won't be as good as Swami Kriyananda, obviously, at opening myself. But it works. We can begin with little steps. So let's look for a moment at talking about being relaxed. I wanted to tell you this episode 17 years ago or so. We went to India on pilgrimage, and at that time Mira, the niece of Yogananda, was still alive, and we would go to meet her. She was very saintly, and she hugged everyone, and I sat next to her. And at a certain point, I don't know why, but I felt the impulse to hug her, so I hugged her from the side. If you embrace somebody in a sideways, usually you feel some kind of resistance. With her, no. It was like she was made out of rubber. She completely relaxed. She didn't give any resistance at all. And for years I asked myself, why did I have this impulse to hug her? And now I'm beginning to understand, because that was an example a perfect example of relaxation. It was something I needed to observe how she was compared to, in order to try to go myself in that direction. So let's look at what Swami Kriyananda says about some of his points about how to overcome the ego. When you see something that you would like to have for yourself, buy it if you can. Accept the satisfaction of owning it. And then, however, with your heart free, give it to somebody else. This is something that could put us into a bit of panic. No, because I'm attached to this thing. I don't want to give it away. But we can begin with little steps. Something that doesn't make us feel like our heart is bleeding. For example, do I like a certain kind of a tea? I buy it and I give it to someone. Think about something small that you can do in this way. Since Christmas is coming, maybe, why do this? Because we are forced to reincarnate because of our desires. So if I buy the tea that I like, I buy this tea for myself, and then every day there's less and less of it. This reinforces my desire. But if instead I give it to somebody else, I have satisfied the desire to buy it, but then I have redirected and transformed that energy in giving it away. Decide not to feel bad when you make a mistake. Obviously, it would make it worse if you just refuse to acknowledge that you made the mistake. When you make a mistake, admit it with calmness and happiness. If not in front of others, at least in yourself. And if somebody scolds you for something you didn't do, you could see that you have a good reason of saying it's not your fault. However, unless it's very important to clarify things, you will gain more spiritually by not defending yourself. This brings us back to the state of being either relaxed or contracted. Imagine in this moment that somebody is scolding you or blaming you for something that you didn't do. If you think that you have to justify yourself, what happens? Your shoulders immediately go up. Your body gets tense. Instead, if you say, I'm sorry, you feel the relaxation. And even if you haven't made that mistake, just say, yes, I'm sorry. Swami Kriyananda, like all great souls, had faced terrible opposition in different times of his life. One time he was under a legal attack And the lawyer who was trying to prosecute him had the nickname the assassin, and they hammered him without mercy. He was an elderly man. They were mean to him. They wouldn't even let him. Swami also says, no, I think we're getting too late.
Avendo sviluppato questa profonda sintonia con Dio, Swami era profondamente consapevole.
Swamiji, with this great attunement to God, he was able to realize that this divine presence was in everyone, and he saw everyone as angels. He did not have to force himself to see the angel in us. Not just in us. At Ananda, he once had a dream in which he saw all humanity, good, bad, beautiful, ugly. And when he awoke, he felt in his heart that they were all adorable, all lovable. Why? Because he was lovable. When you are love, you see in others reflected that which you are. Yogananda said that to overcome ego, it's necessary to meditate ever more deeply and to realize that it is God who acts through us. In that way, we do not create more karmic bounds, more karmic bonds. So it's really God who is speaking now and God who is listening through you. It seems almost like a joke, but it is really true. And if it is God who is acting, why be worried if something doesn't go right? If there's worry, a man said, you said being worried doesn't help, but it does, because every time that I'm worried about something, that which I am afraid of doesn't happen. And usually, almost always, that which worries us doesn't happen, so why not relax? I asked you to do a visualization at the beginning to give you faith in the thought that we are all like little children. When we were tiny children, we weren't aware of being children. In God's eyes, we are still children. So let's try to develop this habit of feeling that we are in God's arms and giving to Him all of our problems and worries and also our joys, to include Him in our lives. It takes a little discipline. Not yet.
Dio